The phone rang at 6:47 in the morning, and Marcus Webb already knew it was not going to be a good day. He had not slept well. He rarely did anymore. Ever since he had opened that file 3 weeks ago, sleep had become something that happened to other people. People who had not seen what he had seen. People who did not carry what he was carrying. He let the phone ring. His daughter, Priya, was still asleep in the next room. She was 7 years old, and she slept with her arms spread wide, like she was trying to hold the whole mattress down. Marcus had checked on her twice already that morning, standing in the doorway in the dark, just watching her breathe. There was something about watching a child sleep that made a person feel both very strong and very afraid at the same time. He could not explain it. He had tried once, to his sister, and she had just looked at him the way people look at someone who is saying something true that they do not want to hear. The phone stopped ringing. He put the kettle on and stood at the kitchen counter and opened his laptop. The file was still there. He had not deleted it. He had thought about it. He had thought about a lot of things in the last 3 weeks. Deleting the file, saying nothing, keeping his head down, keeping his job, keeping Priya in her school, in her room, in the life he had spent 6 years building for her after her mother left. He had thought about all of it. And then, he had opened the file again, read it again, and understood again what it meant. Marcus Webb had worked at Vantage Pharma for 11 years. He was the kind of man companies like to have but rarely promoted. Steady, thorough, honest to a degree that sometimes made people in meetings go slightly quiet when he spoke. He was not loud. He did not send long emails. He did his work and he did it well, and he had never, in 11 years, missed a deadline, fudged a number, or looked the other way on something that mattered. That last part was now the problem. 6 weeks ago, a routine batch audit had landed on his desk. He received several of these a month. Most of them were clean. Some of them had minor flags that required a note in the system, and a follow-up check. This one was different. The batch in question was a pediatric antibiotic syrup, the kind given to children under 5. The kind that came in little orange bottles with child-proof caps and strawberry flavoring, because someone had understood, decades ago, that small children did not like the taste of medicine, and you had to trick them into getting better. The contamination reading was not extreme. It was not dramatic. It was just high enough to cross the threshold that Marcus had spent years memorizing, the internal threshold that Vantage had set for its own quality control, the number below which they said things were acceptable, and above which they said things needed to stop. The reading was above that number. Not by much, but above it. Marcus had looked at the number for a long time. He had pulled the previous 2 batch reports for comparison. He had run the figures again himself, by hand, because he was the kind of man who did that. And then he had written his report. He had flagged the batch. He had recommended a production halt. He had noted the contamination level, the relevant threshold, and the standard protocol for this type of finding. He had filed the report through the internal system, copied his direct supervisor, and sent a follow-up email to the head of the quality division. Then he had gone home, made dinner for Priya, helped her with her spelling homework, and waited. 3 days later, he was called into Diana Holt's office. Diana Holt was the chief executive officer of Vantage Pharma. She had been in the role for 4 years. Before that, she had been the company's head of operations, and before that, she had spent a decade at a larger pharmaceutical group where, by every account Marcus had ever heard, she had been brilliant and ruthless in equal measure. She was not the kind of person who scheduled meetings without a reason. She was not the kind of person who made small talk. She was sitting behind her desk when Marcus arrived. There were 2 people from the legal team sitting to one side. A woman from Human Resources that Marcus recognized but had never spoken to directly was seated near the window. Diana did not stand up. She thanked him for his years of service. She told him that his position had been eliminated as part of a company-wide restructuring effort. She told him his work had been valued. She told him that the paperwork on the table in front of him would cover the details of his departure, including a standard confidentiality agreement that all departing employees at his level were required to sign. She said all of this in less than 4 minutes. Marcus sat very still and listened. He asked about the batch report. There was a pause, a small one, the kind of pause that most people would not have noticed, but Marcus noticed it, because he was paying close attention to everything in that room, and he had the strange, cold feeling of a man watching a door close on him in slow motion. Diana said that all internal quality matters were being handled appropriately, and that he did not need to concern himself with operational issues beyond this point. He asked if the batch had been halted. The woman from Human Resources said, very gently, that his access to internal systems had already been suspended as per standard procedure. Marcus looked down at the paperwork. He should have read it more carefully. He knew that later. He knew it the moment he walked out of the building with a cardboard box and a deactivated key card, and 11 years of his life trailing behind him like smoke. He should have sat there and read every single line. He should have called a lawyer before he touched a pen. But he had not slept properly in 3 days. He was thinking about Priya. He was thinking about the mortgage. He was thinking about the look on Diana Holt's face, which was not unkind, but was completely, utterly sealed. He signed the paperwork. He was in the parking lot by noon. The drive home took 20 minutes. He sat outside his house for another 15. In the car, with the engine off. The street was quiet. A neighbor's dog was barking somewhere. 2 doors down, someone had planted new flowers along their front path, yellow ones, and they looked very bright and very normal in the afternoon light. Priya would be home from school in 3 hours. Marcus went inside and sat at the kitchen table. He opened his laptop. He had kept a personal backup of every major report he had ever filed, not because he had anticipated this moment. He had done it because he was thorough, because he was the kind of man who documented things, because 11 years of working in quality control had made him deeply, instinctively unwilling to let important data exist in only one place. The batch report was there. The contamination readings were there. His filed recommendations were there. He sat with all of it for a long time. And then Priya came home and dropped her backpack by the door and announced that she had learned about rivers in school and that the Amazon River was, in her words, absolutely enormous. And Marcus closed the laptop and made her a snack and listened to everything she had to say about rivers. That night, after she was asleep, he opened it again. The weeks that followed were the kind that leave marks. Not dramatic marks, not the kind of damage that shows on the outside, the quiet kind. The kind that settles into the back of a person's eyes and makes them look slightly older than they did before. He filed for unemployment. He took on 2 small consulting projects through a former colleague. He paid the minimum on the mortgage and hoped the consulting work would become regular. It did not become regular. Priya noticed something was different. She was 7, not oblivious. She asked him once why he was home so much now. He told her he was working from home for a while. She seemed to accept this. Children accept a great deal when they trust the person telling them things. He tried to be worthy of that trust. He did not tell anyone what he had found. Not his sister, not the former colleague, not anyone. The confidentiality agreement sat in his brain like a stone. He was not a man who broke agreements. He was not built that way. He believed that when you gave your word, you kept it. He had always believed that. It was one of the things about himself that he was quietly proud of. But the stone was heavy. He started reading the news differently. He started paying attention to product recall announcements. He started checking the names of pharmaceutical batches against what he remembered from his own records. He told himself this was just something he did now. He told himself it meant nothing. He told himself that for 6 weeks. And then, on a Tuesday evening, when Priya was in the bath and the television was on low in the background, he saw a local news segment. A reporter standing outside a hospital. A mother who could not stop her hands from shaking while she talked into the microphone. A little girl's name on a white board behind a hospital room door. He turned the volume up. The name of the antibiotic in the segment was one he knew very well. He stood in the middle of his living room with the remote in his hand and felt the floor shift under him. Not because he was surprised, because he had known. He had written the report. He had flagged the batch. He had done everything he was supposed to do. And the batch had shipped anyway, and now there was a woman on his television who had not slept in days, and a little girl in a hospital room, and Marcus Webb was standing in his living room in his socks holding a remote control. He turned the television off. He went and got Priya out of the bath and dried her hair and read her a chapter of her book, and waited until her breathing slowed and deepened. Then he went back to the kitchen. He opened his laptop. The file was still there. He sat with it until 3 in the morning, and by the time he finally closed the laptop, the thing he had been trying not to decide had already been decided. He just needed a few more days to catch up to it. He made himself a cup of tea in the quiet kitchen and drank it standing at the window, looking out at the dark street. The neighbor's flowers were invisible in the dark. He could not see them at all, but he knew they were there. He washed the mug and went to bed. He did not sleep, but he lay there quietly, and that was something. 3 weeks later, the hospital forums started appearing. A group on social media, parents connecting across state lines, comparing symptoms, comparing timelines, comparing the names on the medicine bottles in their children's medicine cabinets. Marcus found the group at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday night. He sat and read through the posts for 2 hours. He did not comment. He did not introduce himself. He just read. 18 children, 3 states, 2 with significant complications, 1 in critical condition. One was a 5-year-old girl named Lily Soto. Her mother's name was Carmen. She posted in the group every day. Not dramatically, not with anger, though the anger was there under every word if you looked. She posted with the careful, controlled urgency of a person who had decided that keeping other people informed was the only useful thing she could do while her daughter lay in a hospital bed. Marcus read every one of her posts. He had a daughter too. She was 7. She slept with her arms spread wide. She thought the Amazon River was absolutely enormous. He closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a long time. The confidentiality agreement was still a stone in his chest. But stones, he was beginning to understand, could be moved. The attorney's name was Owen Burke. Marcus found him through a former colleague who had once dealt with an employment dispute. Owen had a small office above a dry cleaning shop and a manner that was direct without being unkind. He read the confidentiality agreement while Marcus sat across from him and drank bad coffee. Then he set it down and looked at Marcus steadily. He said, without softening it, "If you speak publicly, they will come after you hard. They will file immediately. They will freeze what they can. They will make it expensive, and slow, and exhausting. And with a non-disclosure of this type, they may win." Marcus asked what the other option was. Owen said the other option was doing nothing. Marcus looked at him for a moment. Then he asked if there were any legal protections for someone in his position. Someone who had flagged a safety issue internally before being removed. Owen said there were. Federal whistleblower statutes. Complicated. Not guaranteed, but present. Marcus said he would like to know more about them. Owen looked at him for another moment. Then he picked up his pen. That meeting lasted 2 hours. Marcus drove home through afternoon traffic with the windows down. The air was warm and smelled like cut grass. He picked Priya up from school, and she told him her friend had a new puppy, and could they please get a dog, and Marcus said maybe, which was the word parents use when they do not want to say no to something they might one day be able to say yes to. That night he sat at the kitchen table and looked at the backup drive. He was 43 years old. He had 11 years of experience that was now, effectively, unmarketable, because anyone who called Vantage for a reference would get the carefully worded version of events that Diana Holt's team had prepared. He had a daughter, and a mortgage, and a consulting income that barely covered groceries. He also had a file that showed a contaminated batch had been flagged, suppressed, and shipped. And somewhere in a hospital in another state, a woman named Carmen Soto was posting updates about her daughter at midnight because there was nothing else she could do. Marcus Webb was not a dramatic man. He was not built for gestures. He did not imagine himself as a hero. He was a quality control manager who had spent 11 years caring about numbers, because numbers, when you paid attention to them, told you the truth. The numbers on his screen had been telling him the truth for weeks. He picked up his phone. He found the contact he had saved 3 days ago, a journalist named Elena Ruiz, who wrote for a mid-sized regional paper, who had covered pharmaceutical litigation twice before, who had a reputation among the people Marcus had quietly asked for, being careful and thorough and impossible to pressure. He stared at the name for a moment. Then he typed a message. He said only this: "I have information about the children's antibiotic cases. I need to speak with someone who will handle it carefully. I am not doing this lightly." He pressed send. Then he put the phone face down on the table and went to check on Priya. She was asleep, arms wide, holding down the mattress. He stood in the doorway for a long time. Then he went back to the kitchen and waited. Elena Ruiz replied at 6:14 the next morning. She said, "I take these things seriously. Tell me when you are available to talk." Marcus read the message twice. Then he made Priya's lunch for school, braided her hair badly because he had never fully mastered that skill, dropped her off, and drove to a parking garage on the edge of the city. Elena was already there when he arrived. She was shorter than he had expected, with dark eyes and a notebook she held but did not immediately open. She introduced herself without putting her hand out first, which he noticed, because it meant she was reading him and deciding how to match his energy rather than leading with performance. He respected that. She said she would not promise him anything except that she would verify everything independently before a single word went to her editor. She said she would not use his name without his explicit consent at every stage. She said she understood what he was risking, and she was not going to pretend otherwise. He believed her. He handed her the backup drive. She took it and held it carefully. The way people hold things they understand are heavier than they look. He talked for 90 minutes. She asked questions that were sharp and quiet and never leading. She did not react visibly to anything he said, which he found reassuring rather than unsettling. A journalist who reacted to everything was performing. A journalist who listened was working. When he was done, she said she needed 2 weeks to verify the data independently. She said she would be in contact. She said if at any point he wanted to stop, he could stop. Marcus said he did not want to stop. She nodded. They walked to their separate cars without much ceremony. Marcus sat in his car for a while before driving. The parking garage was dim and smelled of exhaust. Somewhere above him, a pigeon was making a sound that echoed strangely off the concrete. He thought about Priya. He thought about Lily Soto. He thought about the batch report sitting on that backup drive, all those numbers, all those months of silence, and the weight that had been sitting in his chest since the day he had watched a door close on him in slow motion. It was still there. But it felt, for the first time in a long time, like something that could be moved. He started the car. He had to pick Priya up at 3. While Marcus and Elena were building what would eventually become the most important story of her career, Diana Holt was managing a problem she had told herself was already managed. She was 51 years old. She had spent 30 years in the pharmaceutical industry. She had run Vantage Pharma for 4 years and in that time had grown revenue by 32% and expanded into 3 new markets and been featured in 2 industry profiles that described her as sharp, decisive, and not someone you wanted across the table from you in a negotiation. She knew about the batch report. She had known about it before Marcus Webb was walked out of the building. She had also known that the timeline for the product in question was critical, that a production halt would delay a major distribution contract by 6 weeks, and that the contamination reading, while technically above the internal threshold, was within a range that her team had assessed as manageable. Manageable was a word that was going to become very important later. She had made a decision. She had documented that decision carefully, with language chosen to emphasize the assessment and minimize the original flag. She had moved the distribution forward. She had removed the person most likely to escalate. She had believed this was the end of it. She was watching the same online forums Marcus was watching, but she was watching them through the lens of a communications team that was already drafting response statements and reaching out to 2 smaller news outlets with background briefings designed to preempt coverage. She had a legal team. She had a crisis management firm on retainer. She had experience. What she did not have was the information sitting on Elena Ruiz's desk. She would not have it for another 10 days. Elena called Marcus on a Thursday afternoon while he was in the middle of helping Priya with a mathematics worksheet about fractions. She said, "Everything checks out, all of it. I am taking this to my editor tomorrow morning." Marcus said nothing for a moment. Priya looked up at him. She had a pencil behind one ear, which she had recently decided was a grown-up thing to do. He said to Elena, "I need you to give me until Monday. I need to do something first." She asked if he was all right. He said he was. He said he just needed a few days. She said Monday was fine. She said she would wait. He thanked her and ended the call. Priya said, "Who was that?" He said, "Someone from work." She said, "I thought you did not have work right now." He looked at her, 7 years old, pencil behind her ear, waiting. He said, "I am starting some new work. It is important work. It might make things a little complicated for a while." She thought about this with the seriousness that children apply to things when they can tell adults are being honest with them. She said, "Okay, can you help me with the fractions now?" He sat back down. He helped her with the fractions. That weekend he called Owen Burke and told him he was moving forward. Owen said he had been expecting the call. Owen said he had already begun preparing a whistleblower protection filing and would have it ready to submit the moment the story published. Marcus signed his affidavit on Sunday afternoon at Owen's kitchen table because the office was closed, and Owen had offered to meet him wherever was easiest. The kitchen table was covered in papers. Owen's wife brought them both tea without being asked. She did not ask what the paperwork was about. She just brought the tea and left them to it. Marcus signed his name at the bottom of 6 pages. His hand was steady. He had expected it to shake. It did not. He drove home in the dark and made dinner and helped Priya choose her clothes for the next day and read her one more chapter of the book about the girl who discovered she could talk to birds. And then he turned off her light and stood in the hallway for a moment with his back to her door. The house was quiet. He went to the kitchen. He did not open his laptop. He did not read any news. He made himself a cup of tea, the same way he had done on the night he had first watched the story come apart in slow motion, and he stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the dark street. He had done what he could do. Now he would find out what that cost. The story published on a Tuesday. Elena had told him it would be online at 7 in the morning. He was awake at 5. He did not look at his phone until 6:58, and then he looked at it for exactly 2 minutes before setting it face down on the counter and making Priya's breakfast. She had no idea. He had told her nothing. She was 7. She ate her toast and talked about a dream she had had involving a horse that could do math, and Marcus listened to every word. He dropped her at school. He drove home. He turned his phone over. 47 notifications. By noon, Vantage Pharma's stock had dropped 11%. By 2 o'clock, the Federal Health Authority had issued a statement saying it was opening a formal review. By 4 o'clock, the batch had been recalled. 6 months after a quality control manager had flagged it, recommended a halt, and been walked out of the building, the contaminated antibiotic batch was finally, formally, recalled. Marcus sat at his kitchen table and read the recall notice 3 times. He did not feel triumphant. He had expected to feel something large. What he felt instead was something much smaller and much harder to name. Relief mixed with something that was almost grief. The kind of feeling that comes when a thing you knew was wrong is finally confirmed to have been wrong, and the confirmation does not undo the time that passed. 18 children, 6 months. One little girl named Lily Soto who had just turned 5 in a hospital room. His phone rang every 40 minutes for the rest of the day. He answered the calls from Owen Burke. He did not answer the others. Owen told him that Vantage's legal team had filed against him for breach of the confidentiality agreement. He told him the filing would attempt to freeze certain assets pending litigation. He told him to expect things to move fast and to be prepared for it to be difficult. Marcus said he understood. Owen said he was proud of him, in the flat, factual way that lawyers sometimes express things they genuinely mean. Marcus thanked him and ended the call. He sat at the table for a while. Then he got up and went to get Priya from school. She ran out of the school building with her backpack bouncing and her braid half undone, and she told him that her teacher had said fractions were very important for later in life, which was funny, because her dad had just been helping her with fractions. He said yes, he had. She said, "Are you okay, Dad? You look tired." He said, "I am okay. I am just glad to see you." She said, "I am glad to see you too. Can we have pasta tonight?" He said yes. They had pasta. The weeks after the story published were the hardest weeks Marcus Webb had lived through since the weeks after Priya's mother had left, and those weeks had been very hard. Vantage's legal filing was aggressive. Owen had warned him it would be. The attempt to freeze his accounts did not fully succeed because Owen had prepared for it, but certain funds were tied up pending the outcome of the case, and the consulting work he had been relying on had stopped entirely, because two of his clients had received calls from people Marcus was now fairly certain were connected to Vantage's communications team. He paid the minimum on the mortgage. He withdrew Priya from her after-school program and found a neighbor who was retired and who agreed to watch her for a smaller arrangement. He sold some things, not important things, things from the back of the garage that he had been meaning to deal with anyway. He did not tell Priya how tight things were, but he did explain, because she was paying attention and she was not oblivious, that things were going to be simpler for a while. Less eating out, less new things, more time at home. She said, "Is this because of the important work?" He said, "Yes." She thought about it. She said, "Was the important work worth it?" He looked at her. He thought about Carmen Soto. He thought about Elena Ruiz, in a parking garage with her notebook. He thought about Owen Burke at his kitchen table with the tea. He thought about a 5-year-old girl in a hospital room, covered in paper butterflies. He said, "Yes, it was worth it." Priya said okay and went back to her book. He watched her read for a while without saying anything. Diana Holt resigned from Vantage Pharma 12 days after the story published. The resignation was announced in a company statement that used the phrase mutual decision and said nothing about the investigation. She was reported to have received an exit arrangement. Marcus read about it in a brief paragraph at the bottom of an industry news update. He did not feel anything particular about it. He had stopped expecting to feel triumphant about individual moments. Triumph was not the right shape for what this was. 2 senior executives were referred for investigation by federal authorities. Their names appeared in longer articles that Marcus read carefully and then closed. The FDA's formal review expanded into a full investigation of Vantage's quality control practices over the previous 3 years. Elena Ruiz was nominated for a regional press award. In her acceptance remarks, which Marcus read in a transcript his sister sent him, she thanked a source who had come forward at significant personal cost, and whose courage, she said, had made the story possible to tell. She did not use his name. She did not need to. He had given her explicit permission to acknowledge him, and the careful way she had done it without identifying him was, he thought, exactly what he would have expected from her. One evening, roughly 3 weeks after the story published, Marcus received a message through the social media group he had been quietly reading for months. It was from Carmen Soto. It said, "I know who you are. Someone told me. I want you to know what you did for my daughter. I cannot say it properly in a message, but I want you to come. Come see her. You should know what you did. Come see her." Marcus read the message twice. Then he sat with it for a day. Then he drove 4 hours to the hospital. He brought nothing. He had thought about bringing flowers and decided against it. He had thought about bringing something for the little girl and decided he did not know her well enough for that yet. He brought only himself, in his regular clothes, slightly tired from the drive. Carmen met him in the corridor outside the room. She was smaller than he had imagined. She had dark circles under her eyes that no amount of sleep was going to fix quickly. She looked at him for a moment without saying anything. Then she said, "Thank you." 2 words, very quiet. Marcus said he was sorry it had taken as long as it did. She shook her head, not dismissing him, just shaking her head at the whole shape of the thing, at the distance between what should have happened and what had happened. They stood in the corridor for a moment. Then she said, "Do you want to meet her?" He said yes. Lily Soto was 5 years old, and she had her mother's dark eyes, and she was sitting up in the hospital bed with a coloring book open across her knees. The room had paper butterflies all over one wall. Her whole kindergarten class had made them and sent them. There were 41 paper butterflies in that room. Lily had counted them. She told Marcus this almost immediately after he sat down. He said 41 was a very good number. She said it was her favorite number now. He asked her what color the butterflies were. She pointed to each one very seriously and named the colors with great authority. Red, pink, orange, another orange, yellow, a kind of green. He listened to all of them. When he left, an hour later, Carmen walked him to the elevator. She did not say much. There was not much that needed to be said. He had come because she had asked him to come. and she had asked him because she understood that some things need to be witnessed in person before they are real. He drove home in the dark. He was back before Priya's bedtime. She was still up, which was a little past her usual time, and she ran to the door when she heard his key in the lock. She said, "Where did you go?" He said, "I went to meet someone." She said, "Who?" He said, "A little girl who is getting better." Priya considered this. She said, "That is a nice thing to visit." He said yes. He agreed that it was. The legal case dragged on for 14 months. Owen Burke had told him it would be slow, and he had been right. It was slow, and it was expensive, and there were weeks when Marcus genuinely did not know how it was going to end. There were mornings when he sat at the kitchen table with his coffee and the paperwork in front of him and felt the particular exhaustion of a person who is fighting a battle that the other side has far more resources to sustain. He did not give up. Not because he was dramatic about it, not because he was thinking about how the story would end, but because when you have already paid the price, walking away from the outcome feels like waste. He had already paid. The question now was just whether he would see it through. Owen filed the whistleblower protection claim under federal statute. It was not a simple process. It was reviewed and questioned, and there were hearings that Marcus attended in his best suit, sitting in chairs designed, it seemed, for maximum discomfort, answering questions from people who used language he sometimes had to ask Owen to translate afterward. He answered every question honestly. That was the only strategy he had. It was not particularly sophisticated. It was just the only one that felt right. The case settled 14 months after the story published. The settlement was not everything Owen had hoped for, but it was enough. The NDA suit was dismissed. The freeze on his accounts was lifted. There were no damages awarded against him. Marcus sat in Owen's office when the settlement came through and felt something that was not quite relief and not quite happiness, but was somewhere in the neighborhood of both. Owen said, "It is over." Marcus said, "Yes." They shook hands. Marcus took Owen out for coffee afterward, at a place near the office that was better than the coffee Owen kept in his desk. They talked about things that had nothing to do with the case. Owen had a daughter in college. Marcus talked about Priya's recent discovery that she wanted to be a marine biologist, which had lasted 3 weeks, and might last longer. It was a very ordinary conversation. Marcus drove home and picked Priya up from school. She had a painting she had made in art class. It was a large blue shape that was, she explained, the Amazon River. He said it was an excellent Amazon River. She said she knew. They drove home with the painting in the back seat. In the spring of 2021, Marcus Webb received a letter from a Senate subcommittee on workplace safety and pharmaceutical industry oversight. The letter asked if he would be willing to testify in support of proposed legislation that would strengthen federal protections for people in his position, people who had reported safety concerns internally, been removed for doing so, and faced legal consequences for eventually speaking publicly. He read the letter 3 times. Then he called Owen. Owen said, "You should do it." Marcus said, "I am not a public speaker." Owen said, "You do not need to be. You just need to tell the truth. You have some experience with that." Marcus laughed. It was a short laugh, a real one. He wrote back and said yes. The hearing was on a Wednesday morning in April. Marcus wore the same suit he had worn to the legal hearings. He had bought it years ago for a conference and it still fit, mostly. He had it pressed the day before. He prepared notes on index cards because he did not trust himself to speak without something to look at when his nerves became too large. He practiced in front of the bathroom mirror twice. He felt ridiculous both times. Priya watched him practice once. She sat on the edge of the bathtub and observed him very seriously. When he finished, she said, "That was good." He said, "Do you mean it?" She said, "Mostly. The part in the middle was a little slow." He said, "Thank you. That is very helpful." She said, "You are welcome." She went back to her room. He looked at his reflection in the mirror for a moment. He was 45 years old now. He looked like a man who had been through something. Not broken by it, just shaped by it, the way wood gets shaped by weather over time. Different from what it was, still holding. The day of the hearing, He drove to the city and took his seat at the long table and arranged his index cards in front of him and poured water from the pitcher that was there and waited. There were cameras. There were people in the gallery seats behind him. There were senators in elevated chairs in front of him, which Marcus found slightly theatrical, but understood was standard. He was introduced. He began to speak. He did not rush. He did not dramatize. He explained what he had done, what had happened, and what he believed needed to change, so that the next person in his position would not have to choose between following the law and keeping their job. He spoke about the gap between what whistleblower protections were supposed to do and what they actually did in practice. He spoke about the 14 months and the legal costs and the consulting work that had dried up overnight. He spoke about the children. He did not speak about Priya. Some things belonged only to him. When he finished, a senator from the Midwest asked him a question about the specific language in the NDA he had signed, and Marcus answered it from memory, because he had read that document approximately 200 times over the course of the last 2 years. The hearing lasted 4 hours. Afterward, in the corridor, a woman approached him. She was with a man and a small girl, who was holding a stuffed animal and looking around at the marble walls with open curiosity. It was Carmen Soto. She had come. She had brought Lily. Lily was 6 now. She was wearing red shoes. She looked at Marcus with the calm, direct gaze of a child who has already spent too much time in rooms that were supposed to be safe and has decided to simply look at everything directly. Carmen said, "We wanted to be here." Marcus said, "I did not know you were coming." She said, "I know. I wanted to surprise you." He looked at Lily. He said, "I heard you like red shoes." Lily said, very seriously, "I like red everything." He said that was a very strong position. She said she knew. Carmen and Marcus stood in the marble corridor, while Lily investigated a decorative column nearby, with the focused attention of a child who has decided a column is interesting. Carmen said, "How is your daughter?" Marcus said, "She wants to study marine biology. This week." Carmen said, "That sounds right for her." He said, "I think so too." They did not talk about everything else, the 14 months, the legal filings, the contaminated batch, Lily's second surgery, the settlement. All of that was part of the story, and the story was real, and it would always be part of them. But there was also this corridor, and red shoes, and a little girl examining a decorative column, and the fact that both of these children were going to grow up. That was the thing that mattered most in the end. Not the legal settlement, not the industry articles or the press coverage or the subcommittee hearing. The fact that Lily Soto was 6 years old and alive and interested in columns. The fact that Priya Webb was 9 years old and had decided, this week, to be a marine biologist. Carmen said she had to get Lily home before she fell asleep on a senator. Marcus laughed. She said, "She does it. I am not joking." He said he believed her completely. They said goodbye in the corridor. Carmen put her hand briefly on his arm, just for a moment, the way people do when words are not quite enough, and a gesture is the only honest option. Then she took Lily's hand and they walked toward the exit, and Lily turned back once and waved with the hand that was holding the stuffed animal, and then they were gone around the corner. Marcus stood in the marble corridor alone for a moment. Then he picked up his index cards and his bag and walked toward the exit himself. It was a clear day. Not warm yet, but getting there. The kind of day that is still deciding what season it wants to be. He had a 4-hour drive home. Priya was at the neighbor's house, and she had been told not to expect him until evening, but if he left now, he might make it before her bedtime. He walked to his car. He drove home. He pulled into his street just after 7, and the lights were on in the neighbor's house next door, and when he knocked, Priya appeared at the door with her coat already on, as if she had been ready for some time. She said, "I knew you would make it." He said, "I told you evening." She said, "I know. I decided earlier." They walked back to their house. The street was quiet. Someone had put new lights along their front path, and they glowed faintly yellow in the early dark. Inside, Priya put her backpack down by the door. She said, "How did it go?" He said, "It went well. I think it went well." She said, "Did you use the index cards?" He said, Yes. She said, was the middle part still slow? He said, probably. A little. She said, that is okay. You can fix it for next time. He looked at her. He said, I do not know if there will be a next time. She said, there will be. She said it the way children sometimes say things when they are not offering an opinion but simply reporting a fact they have already worked out. He did not argue. He went to the kitchen and started dinner, and Priya sat at the table and opened her homework, and the house was quiet and warm, and entirely ordinary. He turned on the small light above the stove. He had spent 2 years in the dark, in one way or another. The light was good. He cooked dinner. They ate. He washed the dishes. He checked on Priya when she was asleep, standing in the doorway the way he always did, watching her breathe, arms wide, holding down the mattress. He turned off the kitchen light. He went to bed. And this time, for the first time in a long time, he slept.